I think the most kind of shocking was the mental health, the kind of gravity of it.
My study shows it compares 3 groups of children when they become adults. And the only difference is, in principle, if they grew up in an intact family or separated parents or, let's say, alienation.
There are a lot of grandparents out there in that situation.
And I knew the most difficult part is to have access to Group C. Where are they? It was not easy to find them.
45% of fathers that went to the service were actively suicidal when they approached the service.
They're still suffering, many years later, the loss of their own children who are now adults, and now they're feeling even more intensely, a sense of loss and grief, and when they learn that they have grandchildren and they have no hope of ever seeing these grandchildren.
When they still live together, you don't ask if they always agree in everything. You don't ask if they have the same point of view about the daily life of the children. You don't ask if they, if they are always in the same side, because it occurs a lot of times that they aren't. And this is normal. So why do we have to pretend that this have to happen when they are separated?
The best way of custody is shared custody.
They say, oh, okay, we have shared custody, but we have to choose which house the child will be. So we are putting a conflict that it doesn't exist. It has to be both houses.
I really believe that a divorce or separation doesn't ruin kids, dysfunction does.
Think about that if you really want to separate, because you will harm your child. If you don't want to harm your child, do it properly. It is possible. My study shows it is possible. But you have to do it wisely, with respect.
Many of them ended up in the family court system, which made everything a lot worse and promoted the kind of conflict within the relationship. Many men felt that the court was almost kind of weaponized against them in that sense, because they were seen as secondary parents, because they're fathers.
And sometimes professionals and church, because they think these 2 parents could never agree, they decide that one parent will be erased from the life of the child. And this is not the solution, because the child needs that parent.
I firmly believe that you can be a bad spouse and still be a good parent.
Sometimes we see during the litigation process that when the court tells the parties to do so, the attitude to shared custody is changing. So I believe that this is the solution, but the problem is that the courts do not use it.
So many people involved that parental alienation will falter due to the weakest link among those people. In other words, everybody has to be on the same page.
And in parental alienation cases, sometimes we see, in one hand, the empowerment of the child to conflict with the other parent, to disobey the other parent.
He tried to reach out, and I was always very cold, very rude, very defiant.
Because you are a bad parent, because you don't listen to your son, because you are in conflict with your son. You created this situation, but I was on the background undermining the mind of the child to do that.
I think it's important not to underestimate the fear that an alienated child has in standing up to the parent who is doing the alienating. I mean, it actually feels like life or death.
I accepted the friend request with the sole purpose of destroying him.
So we know there's psychological effects, and it's for the whole life of the child.
This is where you get, for example, mental health issues, but also physical health issues, antisocial behaviors, because these are kids that have trouble dealing with other kids. They don't get social cues. They don't feel good about themselves, and so they are trying to make up for that.
It's just unbelievable what a brainwashed child would do, even when this child has become an adult.
An attack on the parent-child relationship is an attack on attachment. And attachment is one of the most important and fundamental things that we do as human beings.
Even though logically I knew, of course, I have a right to have a relationship with my mother, you know, my nervous system still said, ooh, don't make dad mad. And it's so hard to overcome that programming.
And the result is, whenever you cut the bonds of a child, you harm the child. Whenever there is a contribution for a conflict to escalate, to rise, you harm the child. Whenever you involve the child in a parental conflict, you harm the child.
If we are dealing with family and children, we need to study all matters very carefully on the way we work with these matters and with these families, because we can change for good the life of these people in a good way or in a bad way.
If there is teachers who need a PhD, it should be early years teachers, not university teachers. Because they are the people who can change. So I always say, please, please put money in the quality of education in the first years of life.
They're also just so highly isolated. Nobody really knows about them. They don't tell anyone that they're grandparents. They don't tell anyone about their own adult children that they've lost contact with. So just everyday life is so painful for them when they see grandparents or hear, know people who have grandkids and talk about them. They just can't face it.
The moment that you woke up to that, you have so much guilt. You have so much guilt, and
they live a life of just deep grief that contains all the major elements of a bereavement over several years, decades in some cases.
It turned out that you are actually just an orphan all of your life, because on one hand, one of the parents was ripped away from your life, and what you are left with is actually an abuser. The one that loved me was not allowed to be with me, and the abuser is the one that raised me.
There are critics of parental alienation. They have it wrong. They're passing on misinformation. Parental alienation has a strong scientific foundation. We know the characteristics, the symptoms, we know the 17 behaviors, we know the 8 characteristics of an alienated child, we know the 5-factor model, we know how to diagnose it, we know how to describe it, we understand that it's toxic, we know that it has a terrible impact on kids. It is a science.
Many people doesn't update their knowledge, doesn't deep their knowledge. So you need to be in constant training.
Parental alienation is not a relatable problem. People that haven't been through it will have so much trouble understanding it.
The system is not prepared to deal with family conflicts because it's based on justice. But what is justice concerning the well-being of children?
We've basically identified separated fathers as an extremely vulnerable group that requires a much greater amount of intervention than we currently give.
There are national marriages and marriages who are living abroad, and one of the parents is deciding to get back to Poland. And we've got a lot such cases, so I think it's a huge problem.
I do a lot of international child abduction in my practice of law. Unfortunately, it is a phenomenon. It is a prevalent phenomenon.
The judges and the public prosecutors also, they have to understand more the psychological effects on children's lives.
I have judge after judge after judge who will order reunification therapy, but they don't order the alienating parent to to have therapy to stop the alienation. And so if you don't do that, then they continue to undermine and sabotage any gains that are made in the reunification therapy. And that's what we see over and over again.
It's very difficult to change unless you do a very deep therapy.
Now, if you have two lawyers who get it, you have a guardian ad litem who gets it, you have a judge who gets it, we can click and we can make things happen. But it is rare that all of those people get it at the same time and in the same way.
I have regrets now for sure, because now I wish I had just chosen her and I would have been okay with the consequences of if my father said it's her or me, well then it's her. That's how I wish it would have gone.
They took my nest little by little away until it disappeared. So suddenly you are a child and have no nest anymore. They destroyed him.
It's shocking because when you just put these stories together, you look at it and you're going, oh my God, it's the same story.
But once a parent decides to alienate, the family will never be the same.
And it just tells you how common and widespread is parental alienation and how many years later it's still having this effect.
One of the men said, if you can't be a father, what's the point?